by no means least, we'll come to the winter plan update from Gethin under 7.2, which is usefully at the end of the agenda anyway. So it'll be in that order. And unless I have missed something, I think at that point we will have covered all the items on the agenda. Just to be clear with colleagues who weren't here earlier, we dealt with item 8, the consent agenda, in your absence. So we'll be finishing up at 7.2. So Sally, if we can come to you for the finance report and then also the capital update report, that'd be fantastic. Thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan. I will take the finance report as read. There are just a couple of things I want to draw to your attention. So we are continuing to forecast a break-even position for the year end, but it's important to highlight the significant risk associated with that. In particular, there is risks around the expenditure associated with the POW roof critical incident and the associated plans to recover, maintain planned care performance. So at this point, we've assumed that that will be fully funded by Welsh Government. And as Gethin mentioned earlier, we've had confirmation around 7.5 of the roughly 12 million we've asked for planned care, and the remaining 4.4 million, which is associated with unscheduled care / other. So it's a catch-all category. We have assumed that we will have it funded, but also included it within our risk table because we still haven't had any response around that. We submitted a proposal on the 11th of November. So I'll be chasing that up. I've got regular touch points with Howell Jones as Welsh Government's Director of Finance for Health, and hopefully we'll have some positive news, but it is important to flag that risk. In terms of our savings position, again, just to flag that is below in terms of the forecast. We've been rigorous in terms of how we've treated savings. Savings are where we are able to make a budget reduction within the ledger, but that means that performance is less than plan, and that has a consequent impact onto our underlying position. So at month 7, we've deteriorated our underlying position to a deficit of 8.3 million. We're expecting that will worsen by another 1 to 2 million before the year end. But it's, I think it just reflects the savings position and the cost pressures that we're seeing in year. There are quite a number of areas where we're still awaiting final confirmation of allocations, and these are important because they're quite substantial allocations. In particular, there's funding around pay awards where we were told to plan on these being fully funded. However, it appears that our bank pay rises won't be funded, and that will give us approximately £1 million in year problem. And there are some other areas where we haven't yet had confirmation, including real living wage. So although those give us a little bit of uncertainty in terms of our forecast position, and one of the reasons why our risk position is so high. In terms of capital, I'll come on to that shortly, but just to note that pre the POW roof business case, our capital resource limit, or CRL, was 63.6 million. That is the largest capital programme across Wales and reflects the size of the Prince Charles Hospital scheme. So happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Sally. Very helpful. Questions to Sally on the finance report? Just so I'm clear in my own mind, Sally, particularly around the financial savings, at the moment, we are forecasting that our savings for the year will be 13 million below the 26.3 million target.
Yes.
Just so I can understand a bit further, is a chunk of that challenge in particular because of how we've needed to respond to POW, and therefore the ability of our care teams to find and work through some efficiencies, or do you think we were always going to get to that point? Because that feels to me to be in a more challenged position compared to the savings targets we had in the last financial year. Am I right?
So in some ways we've been more rigorous this year in terms of being clear. Now we've had after the additional money was allocated, if you remember, we had a deficit plan last year and we're working on control totals. Now we're back to established budgets, and that people have got what should have been a doable position coming into this year. We gave, if you remember, we allocated 44 million out into sort of frontline services. We've been more rigorous around how we record savings, looking at the definition that we're asked to work to, which is there has to be an intentional action, and we should be able to reduce our budgets in order to reflect the changes. So that is more rigorous, which is probably giving us some of the deficit. It doesn't change the overall bottom line position, because what we're doing is taking any minor variances as operational variances, and some go up and some go down, and the net position is the same. But I think it gives us a better feel about what we're really delivering as savings, which are transformational or intentional service change bases. In terms of what that means for us as we go into next year, that is what is leading to some of our underlying position. I think your other question was around the POW roof. So Gethin and I had spent quite a lot of time with our care groups working through recovery plans, the challenge being to address the in-year position and to go into next year with a balanced position. And it is fair to say that some of those schemes have now fallen by the wayside, so the recovery planning schemes, as a result of the POW changes. Some of them may be able to be delivered because they focus on some service change proposals that we may be testing now as part of those changes, but there are others where we really have lost the ability to secure those savings in year, and that's part of what's reflected in the unscheduled care other basket of what we've requested from Welsh Government support.
Thank you, Sally. Sally, obviously one of the conversations I've had with the Cabinet Secretary and fellow chairs has been around that 50 million that was announced relatively recently. It was done in two chunks, wasn't it? And I think the second bit, the sort of 22 million, was announced at the Labour conference. He was looking for assurance really that boards were cited on how we were using our share of the additional resources. Maybe something we might want to come back to, as perhaps we have that board development session where we look at our financial position and where we're going to head into by April of next year. But obviously, there are those additional resources, but obviously there are likely to be additional resources coming into budgets for certainly for April of next year, based on the UK government's announcement. I know we won't be clear on that yet because the Welsh Government budget won't be announced until the 10th of December. And that itself will go through quite a significant process of scrutiny. But obviously, I know there's, like everything else with this, isn't it? We're juggling quite a lot, and there's many variables which I accept. But I think it'd be good for us to reflect on where we've got to by the time we have the board development session, what the financial picture is telling us, and what we think we might know as far as we can about next year at that point, in order to try and set out some of those priority areas.
So if I deal with just the 2 points,
Yeah.
in terms of the 50 million plan care recovery funding, the additional, this is, if you look at the slide on page 217, so one down from the summary, that gives a little bit of detail around the POW critical incident. That shows the amount of funding that was originally allocated to us from what's called the original PCR plan, but that's the original extra PCR plan. Then the impact of POW on the PCR plan, which is what's flagged here, and there's some assumptions for next year, and that's part of the 7.5 Gethin that we've had confirmed.
Yes, correct.
Yeah. So those are being funded from those monies, as far as we're aware, and then the rest of it is being requested as additional support, recognising the exceptional nature of where we are. In terms of next year, it's probably worth me just flagging. So the deterioration in the underlying position is important here, because our plan, we had a 3-year financial plan approved as part of our submission at the start of this year. That assumed that we would deliver the position and go into next year with a surplus, an underlying surplus of 2.1 million, fairly modest, but would give us a sort of an ability to think about some investments from that. It looks like we're probably going into the year with a deficit of approximately 10 million. There is additional funding announced from UK government, you're quite right. There are also significant pay award calls on that. We're still awaiting some sight of how the employer's national contribution for direct impacts will be funded. My reading of the tables that were published is that's below the line of the current departmental expenditure limits, but that needs to be tested and confirmed, which would but there is going to be an impact that we will need to understand and manage in terms of some of our providers, particularly in the continuing healthcare, domiciliary care and voluntary sector spaces.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Sally. Any questions on the finance report? Okay, we'll move the report. Thank you very much. We'll move on to the capital report update. Thank you, Sally.
Yeah, so this report is fairly detailed, as you can see, and has already been considered at PPF. There is one addition to the paper following the committee, which is the request to approve the disposal of the of Pontypridd Health Centre. To note, this has no clinical services within the health centre now, and there's no consultation requirement, but this is about us adding it to making the technical moves to dispose of it. There is some interest from a public sector partner, and we'd like to start to move that forward. So there's a public sector protocol, and we list it on a database for interest. One organisation has visited once, wants to visit again, and it's likely to be the next site disposal. We don't at this stage have a value to disclose, because that will very much depend on the valuation process and who purchases it and whether we go to the open market. But I'm requesting that as an additional. I'll just briefly take you through the structure of the report. So in terms of our capital position, you can see the funding there. We have a discretionary capital allocation, and then we have additional allocations for specific items. Prince Charles Hospital, as you can see here, phase 2 is at 24 million, and that may increase slightly in year. And the phase 3 fees, that's just to draw your attention to that, because phase 2 business case will complete sometime in 2026, and then we will move on to the final phase, which is phase 3, but that requires a separate business case and tendering exercise or procurement exercise around that. So it's that's a significant piece of work in itself. And then you'll see that there are a number of things that are headed under EFAB. How that works is we get our discretionary allocation top sliced, which is why it drops from 8 to 6.9. And that we contribute 30% of each of those, and then Welsh Government top that up by 70%. So being successful in those areas gives us a real benefit, because we only have to use 30% of our discretionary. Other than that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Sally. Okay, so two things I'm reading for the board. Any questions, Sally, on the capital update report, which obviously has gone to PPF, before we come to the requirement for board to give approval to the disposal? Excuse me. As set out in the report. So, Kath, thank you very much.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you. I thought it's really useful. It's good to see all the detail and everything that's going on. It shows our quite large capital programme, and I think, Sally, you mentioned about us having a small capital team, so I just wondered whether that's something that's being looked at in terms of resources, around being able to deliver on our large capital programme, I guess.
Sally?
We do include project management expertise in the sort of capital spend, so it's part of the programme. It is worth noting, though, we've experienced quite a lot of difficulty in recruiting people with the right skills recently, and that is a rate limiting step. So it's not just we can make the funding as part of the capital programme. I think finding the people with the right skills, because these are big complex programmes. Even some of our smaller schemes have significant complexity around their stat compliance and other elements. So there's something about how we develop that workforce for the future, and we have had discussions with Ian Gunny's team in Welsh Government and with specialist estates about how to develop some of that expertise.
Okay, thank you.
Sally, just one point of clarification for me in terms of the property disposal of Pontypridd Health Centre.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering in terms of conversations with Welsh Government as to what happens to the as with the financial realisation, the receipt of funds from that.
And we will have that conversation about building that into future plans, but we will need to secure their agreement if it's based on value.
Okay, right. Thanks.
So it'll be part of an ongoing dialogue, Jonathan.
Yeah. Okay. I personally speaking, I think there's a very strong case for health boards, maybe collectively, to be saying to our colleagues in government, you know, we understand why rationalising our estate is really important, and certainly making a judgment, going back to conversations earlier about, you know, estate as an enabler, being driven by the sorts of clinical models we need to deliver, and the one following the other. And therefore, in many cases, there will be buildings that conclude we will not need to use in the future potentially. However, certainly my view as a chair of a health board is that those resources ideally should be available to the health board to spend on transforming and doing things differently. For example, investing in digital data and other things. Yeah. So, but I think there's an opportunity there for chairs of health boards probably to have that conversation with our colleagues about, look, I think we could do things quite differently in the future. Sorry,
the usual process is we do retain the funds for these smaller disposals. So that's what's happened with all the recent ones, but we just need to always make sure we dot the I's and cross the T's.
I would just highlight to the board that we've just had £27 million of Welsh Government capital, and we've just been in a meeting arguing for nearly another £200 million of capital to come our way. We're probably asking above our weight, shall we say, compared to some of our neighbours. So there may be a pushback from people to say, actually, maybe that little pot can come towards contributing towards some of the money we've already given you. But I would always argue for that, you know, to your point as well, John. But I think, yeah, exactly. So we do need to ask, because I actually think, to your point about digital, there's something about actually using capital receipts from buildings to invest in digital sends a really strong message that we're actually moving away from physical infrastructure to digital infrastructure. So I think there may be a strong case for that.
Yeah, no, I suspect Paul's absolutely spot on, but I got to make
a
bit cheeky and ask you on occasion and see what the response is. But no, but I think just in terms of that longer term conversation, I think, you know, many other health boards will be in very similar positions, looking at their estate, thinking about what works, what doesn't work, and if we're going to support a transformation agenda. Obviously, this is something I think needs to be talked through with officials. But yeah, I suspect you're right in this instance. We've obviously had some very other productive conversations of late with other major projects that we are seeking to deliver.
I think it's worth noting as well, if you look at the NHS Wales prioritisation schedule that is included at 2.5, we've just been talking about Llantrys and Health Park. That was down as our #1 priority. PCH phase 3 is our #3, but then before that we had POW theatres, the fire safety requirements, and then POW programme of infrastructure work, where we'd highlighted the start of the programme to mitigate some of the risks that we inherited. So I think in terms of that, you can see we've probably knocked off a few of those in recent months, because both the fire enforcement works and some of the infrastructure work will be handled by the latest programme. But there's huge demands across Wales. The backlog maintenance figure, ours is not out of kilter with other health boards, so it's significant across Wales. And then there's the service change priorities as well. And still, although there's more capital being allocated to Welsh Government, the programme is still constrained.
Absolutely, Sally. I think it is right to recognise the enormity of that additional resource that's been invested by Welsh Government into CTM to support, you know, the transformation agenda, in whatever shape and form that's taken. So yeah, it's worth. I think you're right to pull that out of the table, and obviously we've got other priorities we need to focus on as well. But certainly, yeah, there's been a lot of additional resources coming to this health board. Okay, any questions to Sally on programme update? No. Okay, so can I ask the board? Oh, sorry. Yes,
just a quick one. It mentions a MyState generator on one of these pages. Funding of £600,000 was given, but we paused that, and I wonder what's happened to that money.
we manage it across the different years in agreement with Welsh Government. So it will be a scheme for next financial year.
Thanks. Thanks. Okay. Okay. Can we note the report? But can I ask the board to approve the disposal of the Pontypridd Health Centre as part of the estate's rationalisation programme? Yes. Okay. Thank you very much, Sally. Thank you very much indeed. I'll now come to Linda. Linda, if we can go back to 5.5, the planning maturity matrix, if that's okay. And after that, we'll go on to the IMTP.
Thank you very much, Chair. So we're obviously delighted to be given the opportunity to reflect on the maturity of our planning processes and to give you the privilege of commenting. It's actually, this came from NHS exec colleagues, and it's slight. I mean, there has been some benefit to us of making undertaking some reflections. It would have been, I think, I spoke to Samir about it. It's very formative in its phase, so it's not yet clear where this leads us all in terms of comparison and development and, you know, a progression. So it's a point in time. And as you can see, it asks us to reflect on our longer term strategy, how we then align that into our IMTP, how dynamic it is, how it then becomes operationalised and delivered, and our approach to improvement. And as a thumb rule, we've pretty well assessed ourselves at a kind of out of 0 to 6, a 3 to 4. At 0 to 5, we've assessed ourselves on a 3 to 4, except where we know that because we haven't been able to undertake the ACSP engagement processes, we can't articulate publicly clarity of strategy and demonstrate how we've taken our public along with us. So I hope you think it's fair as an assessment. I have to say that when I did speak to Samir, she thought that she'd be surprised if we weren't putting in high scores for an organisation that had submitted a balanced plan. But I think it's more honest, personally. But obviously your opportunity to comment and if there's anything that you think would do differently.
Linda, what does Welsh Government do with the plans when they're submitted?
The plans.
Sorry, our assessment.
Our assessment. I don't know. I think that they will see what everybody's collected, and it will most likely turn into assurance questions through JET, things like that. I would think.
Yeah.
I don't get a sense that there's any intention for any kind of development package.
Questions to Linda on the document? No. So congratulations on I think it's extremely well written. I mean, I don't disagree with the analysis and the outcome in here. And maybe we have been a bit too conservative in saying a 3/4, but I think that has to be balanced against the risks that inherently we face as an organisation and some of the challenges we're trying to meet. So I think a level of caution is probably quite a healthy thing to do anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there is quite a lot of more discussion at the moment going on about the planning process per se. We've now got the clinical networks that are established, which are designed to try and bring some of the sort of thinking up from the clinical teams. I'm now on the clinical national clinical framework board, which is meant to also help guide this. And to be honest, it's becoming quite a complex landscape, and I'm not quite clear. I feel sometimes these things we end up with. If you sit a group of people in the room and say, "What would you like to be in a plan?" They'll all tell you individually what they think should be in a plan, and what we get back is, here's a set of things that we'd like to see in a plan. But it doesn't actually articulate a story about what people are looking to achieve. So I think part of our challenge is to try and we try and do this through things like JET and other interfaces, is to try and take the ambitions and requirements that are being set upon us, but try and turn them a bit into but we're already doing that through our sort of story, because otherwise it becomes a very mechanistic process, which doesn't really, it's about solving particular problems at a point in time rather than describing a story of where we want to get to in the future and how we're moving along that journey. And I think that's part of the problem with the way the planning process is constructed today. And interesting, things that are very key priorities then don't appear in the plan at all. And you think, well, so there's a disconnect sometimes between what's coming up from the bottom from the clinical team not appearing in the planning process. So yeah, it's
if anything, what I would say with this is that even if it doesn't lead to something significant happening within perhaps Welsh Government and our officials interface with health boards around some of that performance improvement work, I think this is a really useful exercise for us as an organisation. I think it helps us as a board to to reflect. I think it sets it out in a way that I think is actually quite helpful to us as an organisation, even if it's not used to a huge effect by somebody else. Yeah, and that to me is the greater value of it. Thanks, Linda. Okay, so we've been asked to agree the proposed level of maturity as set out in the report. Are colleagues happy to do so? Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks, Linda. Terrific. Okay, we'll move on to item 7.1, which is the development process for the IMTP for 2025 to 2028.
Thank you. So the cover paper is your kind of annual reminder of the process that we'll be undertaking over the next 4 months now to arrive at a signed off IMTP in March. Although I might also pause here to note that this is the first time I've never had any planning guidance at the end of November. I mean, this is the first time that's ever happened, that we still haven't had any planning guidance. It usually comes out in September. I suspect it's brought up in a new ADSEC that we are blind to a large extent. Although the mood music is, whilst the mood music is, what the trajectories are, because obviously around plan care and things like that, we know what's been set out previously. What we don't really know is what new things he's going to require that we're going to have to adapt in. But however, the main thing I want to bring to your attention today is this is the first time that we've included internal commissioning intentions. These came out of, sometimes people ask me what the strategy groups do, and the genesis of these was these are the topics that are deemed strategically important through all of their work that we now need to start operationalising in this year. So, starting to develop the plans. Now, the reason that's still a draft is that it's important that we co-create the versions of them with the care groups, and there's some work that's due to come to fruition next week that will start to populate the metrics and the target dates as the care groups have a chance to consider the relevant indicators in there. But those are designed to reflect the strategic priorities that we've been working on. And so, for instance, you'll see an indication about transfer of two services from secondary to community care in diabetes and respiratory, building on the ophthalmology work that's happened previously. So, you can start to see a golden thread, I hope, of intentions in the strategic space into a plan for this year. So those will inform, along with other things, the plan on page that our care groups will be working on, and that in turn will inform then the document that you get to see. But of course, none of it can happen in isolation, and not only have we not got the planning guide, we're quite used to not having the final financial allocation at this point. And so the process over we'll do a fuller briefing. I think we've got a slot in 2 weeks, haven't we? But that will be the familiar process of trying to balance ambition, cost, activity.
Yeah, I thought it was a great list. I was looking particularly at your draft 2, around, and it really shows our intention, doesn't it, to shift left around primary care, community care. So I thought it was a brilliant list with my notes. The only two things I was thinking that weren't in there, and I know we can't put everything in there, the things that came to mind was around dentistry and our waiting lists and what we do around population health and prevention and early intervention. We've looked quite a lot around that, around dentists. And the other thing, and I don't quite know where it sits, which is probably my ignorance, but it was just more around the GPs and the enhanced services. And, you know, it's so, I know clusters are in there, but kind of that contractual monitoring arrangement with GPs, where do we pick that up at all in the IMTP, or where does that kind of sit, I suppose, just from my information?
Well, it sits more in the programme for primary care, doesn't it?
Yeah.
What this doesn't try to do is capture all BAU. And some of that is BAU. I think the bit about dentistry isn't BAU, and was a conversation we had just last month, wasn't it? This had already come out of the blog. So I think we do need to think about, is there anything that isn't in business as usual that around both of those factors?
Thank you.
Just on the dental point, we had, and I'm trying to remember which meeting was it. Oh, it's the adults. No, it was the integration board this week. We talked about the issue, and we had a conversation at our exec team meeting the other week about the issues we've got with childhood dentistry, and particularly poor oral health in children, leading to lots of children having total dental extractions, which frankly we were saying almost should be a never event, really. I mean, you know, we're becoming a bit almost desensitized to it now. And we raised it actually as a conversation with the local authority colleagues the other day, saying, you know, would that be a topic that something like the RPB should be picking up? Because it isn't just a health issue. Yes, clearly there are important issues around dentists being available to look after kids with teeth issues, but there's also the wider societal issues, there's education issues, etc. So actually I was quite encouraged by the positive reaction from the three local authorities saying, actually this is something that maybe we as local authorities need to step into the space more, because we have an influence potentially through schools and others. And I just think it's a good example of something that actually we should be taking into that partnership space and say, we can do some of it. You know, we can look at the design for life teams and the dental services we provide, but actually there's a bigger conversation to have here about what are we doing collectively to help this really important measure.
Yeah, we picked up the same conversations. We met with the director of education for Merthyr and the head teachers throughout Merthyr today. Clearly, there is the Design to Smile programme, but they're also they are facing increased demands in terms of educational additional needs, autistic spectrum, etc. So there is a clear understanding that this can't just be an autists problem or the health board's problem. This is everybody's problem. It's just about carving out that space, really. At the same time as, I mean, I'm looking at this list, and from a public health point of view, I'm thrilled, to be honest. But I mean, there's clearly, I mean, so much bandwidth, isn't there, year on year, and clearly we need to say, well, this is how we build on that going forward as well.
Yeah, just some clarification really on the commissioning intentions list there. So on creating health, one of the first ones you got there is a personalised care plan in place. I would imagine as a health board, we would be aiming for that to have everybody have that eventually. But I'm assuming we starting with people who are at risk, maybe overweight people or diabetes. Am I interpreting that correctly?
Correct.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Vulnerable individuals.
Thanks, Linda. Any other questions? Some really rich information, which again I think could help feed into that conversation in December about the sorts of things that we want to really deliver next year. I know that involves conversation about resourcing, but I want to start that conversation with some ambition, and I think this really does set out, you know, the clarity, the sorts of things that are very much part of that broader agenda. So thanks, and we can use this in 2 weeks' time. Now we move on to the final. On time as well. Thank you. The board secretary as we now get to the winter plan update at just after the quarter one. The board secretary has pointed out we've suddenly ended up managing to get this done to time, which is quite frankly miraculous. So the winter plan update. really important, and delighted we've got this on the agenda today. So, Gethin, thank you very much.
Thank you. I won't take you through the slides that are in your pack. They are actually constantly evolving. So there is now a latest, another iteration since the one that was published with your board papers. I guess there are sort of 5 key themes to what we're trying to do, and setting that in the context of a system that is more challenged because of the critical incident PAW, and therefore how we work in a different way. So the first theme is absolutely how do we ensure that we can free up the emergency departments to only see those patients that really need to be there. And we've got a number of initiatives. So we have gone live now with an urgent treatment centre model in Prince Charles Hospital. That's currently running 5 days a week. That will be moving to a 7-day-a-week operation, and we're looking to extend its hours of operation to into the evening. That at the moment is seeing around, so we have a GP working within that space, and they are seeing on average 20 patients a day that would historically have gone into the ED stream. So part of it is about taking out of the ED stream the patients that don't need to be there. So that's one of those key initiatives. The second is about expanding the navigation hub, increasing the capacity we've got to supporting care and care homes, because we know that there are a cohort of patients there who we can manage in a different way, and avoid inappropriate conveyance into our hospitals. So we've got a number of initiatives. We've got the work going on with the respiratory, making sure we've got care plans in place for all our high-risk respiratory patients, and really trying to ensure that we have that level of focus. The second is those that do need to come to hospital. How do we increase the number of patients that we manage on an ambulatory basis? So as I touched on earlier, we've gone live with the STAMP programme at Prince Charles. We're rolling that out to Royal Glamorgan. We've done a lot of work to strengthen the surgical SDEC model, same-day emergency care models across our sites. So again, we're seeing the vast majority of our emergency admissions are coming in and being managed in an ambulatory way. Linking to that, we're working with Tech Cymru to look at the use of some of the technologies they've got available for us, to increase the range of patients that we can manage on a virtual ward arrangement and to keep at home or not to admit. And so there's a lot of enthusiasm both to the navigation hub and to our acute medicine teams to expand that. So there's a big urgent piece of work going on. Clearly, there is then a focus of how those patients that do need to come in, how do we get them home in a timely way? And again, we touched on the work we're doing with our local authority colleagues earlier on in board, and of course we've got the mobilisation of CTM Hospital at Home. So that again is a real focus for us that we do that. There is something about the resilience of our workforce, and that we can keep as much capacity open. So we are working with all our teams to make sure that we are rostering people in a way that creates the greatest resilience. So looking at our peaks in demand and making sure if we're rostering additional staff around that in a way that is sensitive to that demand profile. And then the final piece is about how do we robustly manage the service over this period. So we're rolling out Optimise now at pace across the Royal Glamorgan. So that is around a multidisciplinary approach to really understanding what is happening for each of our patients, and being really clear about what's the goal, when are we going to achieve it, and we know that supports patients to move through our systems more quickly. It's about ensuring we've got really robust on-the-day flow management arrangements, everyone being clear of their roles and responsibilities, and having regular reset fortnights. So we know that when we do that focused piece of work for a fortnight, we can reset the way in which our hospitals work. And so we're working through those arrangements and having those in place. So it's a complex, when you go down into each of the care groups, there's a lot of detailed plans for what each of those care groups are doing. But the core themes of what we're trying to achieve through our winter plan this year is absolutely about those 5 things. avoiding patients coming to the emergency department if they don't need to be there, managing as many of our patients on an ambulatory basis as we possibly can, getting people home as promptly as we can, making sure our workforce is resilient, and really making sure that we've got that grip on our operational day-to-day. So I have taken any questions on any specifics.
Thank you, Gavin. A really comprehensive set of slides, some fantastic information in there, and be under no illusion about the level of work that's been done to prepare for what is the most challenged time of the year, although one could argue that all bits of the year are challenged. But this is, a huge piece of work, Gavin, so thank you very much indeed. Questions or comments on this? Paul?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's a lot of work gone in to plan for this, but I think it's important to reflect, and Getting, we were talking about this earlier in the week, weren't we? Bearing in mind we're 75 beds down on where we would be normally. Actually, it's pretty astounding that we're not in, we're not managing. I mean, it's tight, it's busy everywhere, it's challenging, but we're not in a meltdown situation, that it could, and frankly, some of that is down to all the efforts and hard work of redesigning some of those pathways that we've already started. And Getting's described also has some that are going to be rolled out into other areas. But having been at PCH last week and talked to the team up there and seeing how they're taking people from the front door and sort of signposting them into different services depending on what their needs are, it just shows that if we can get that model right and turn as many people as we can around at the front door, and ideally stop them coming in the first place with things like the application hub, it enables us to manage at a time of particular challenge. And ensure that people can get seen quickly. So our ambulance handovers are still pretty good. Our waits in ED are, we can always improve, but considering what we're managing at the moment with the reduced capacity, I think that's it. Thank goodness we were already on this course already when we've had this to deal with. Because had we not done all this work on the same day ambulatory work, we would have been in a really, really difficult place. So I think just to say, it is going to be challenging. It is always challenging over winter, but I would suggest that we're in a good place given some of the pre-work that's been done by Getting and the teams in the run-up to this winter.
Okay. Any questions? Getting, thank you for the report and thank you. Okay. Having sorted item 8, item 9. There's no other business that I've been made aware of. If I could just remind colleagues, as always, in terms of improving how we conduct our business, if there's any feedback in terms of today's meeting, please do so within the next 2 weeks. Just to advise the board that there will be an in-committee board meeting starting shortly in respect of the regional diagnostics programme, which is the endoscopy and radiology business cases. So they will be discussed in committee starting, I think, by 1:30 this afternoon. The next scheduled meeting of the board in public will take place on the 30th of January 2025. But just to remind colleagues, as I mentioned earlier, there's a board development session here in 2 weeks' time. Rydym yn dod y cyfarfod o bodd iechyd gyfem, a hofyn y diolch i bawb sydd wedi ymuno yn ei gwylio y cyfarfod heddiw. And now bring the board meeting to a close, and I would like to extend my thanks to all those who have participated in today's meeting and those who have observed the meetings virtually. Thank you all very much indeed. That concludes our meeting.
Well done.